Honors English 117 is a trap set by the English teachers of Cole to trick sheltered students into more work than they could imagine. They occasionally brought it up throughout the year how we should work hard now to get into the advanced class next year with a fun teacher, the GPA advantage of an honors class, and improvement in our writing that would last forever. They made hardly any mention of the rigor brought along with improvement, instead creating an illusion strong enough to entice 70 incoming freshmen into the honors class. On the first day of school, 30 of the freshmen that fell for the trap entered room 218 when period 3 came around. We immediately searched for our friends upon walking in the door. In groups we discussed what we knew was coming, sharing rumors passed down from siblings and friends. We didn't know exactly what to expect, but we knew it was going to be intense at the least. Mr. Mercado eventually ended his silence to give us our seats and take attendance before getting into his introduction of the class. Setting the tone for the full year, he was constantly making jokes, but he made his expectations clear. The portfolio was introduced, and I was terrified immediately. Last year, our teacher may have guided us through 5 essays, holding our hand each step of the way. 6 essays, 2 rewrites, 1 narrative, and a smaller piece on grammar were all to be done on our own. Then he talked about what we would be doing in class, and on the inside there was a hideous mix of crying and screaming, when the huge quantity of what I would be writing finally dawned on me. For a fleeting moment, I considered the alternative to the class. Take a step down to the normal English, cut my workload to a quarter of what it would be in this. On that day, all I wanted to do was outlast the storm of work I knew was coming, not learn from it. The only reason I didn't take the easy way out, which sounded so sweet compared to the nightmares being recited from Mr. Mercado's mouth, was a slight hope that not everything I'd been told was a lie, and that through the struggle I would become a great writer. The first quarter only proved that even if I were to become only a good writer, it would be through a lot of work. My terrible schedule for extra essay writing was a testament to the procrastination I still held. 2 in the first month, then putting off the rest to the last week of the quarter. They were basic extra essays that took no effort. One, of course, was my first day of high school, the original thinker I was. There was no structure, just simply recounting the day, giving pathetic attempts at humor and symbolism in small events, and grammar mistakes filled the paper. My working class was hardly better. For our first assignment, our reaction to the class website, I started with, based on what I have read on your website and have heard from others, I am both very excited and slightly nervous about the class. And for my introduction of Cole, my first line was, "Hi, I'm Matt, and I will be introducing you to Cole Campbell." I didn't understand the complexity or the importance of the first line, which was very evident in every single one of my pieces. My first opportunity to show what I had been improving upon this year was our personal narrative. Both of these words scared me. Personal, because I'm quite closed off emotionally, and narrative, because my life has been very uneventful. I decided to write my narrative on a series of events throughout my life. My cousin's death, my grandfather's death, and my experience with appendicitis, which I exaggerated the seriousness of to try to fit the theme and moral, when in reality I spent 12 hours in a hospital and missed a day of school. Despite a poor attempt at a theme that really meant hardly anything to me before writing the narrative, I often took breaks when I was writing just to think about my morbid topic of death, making me realize that my thinking was improving alongside my writing, and these are perhaps the 2 biggest focuses of the class. In quarter 1, we also read The Catcher in the Rye, my favorite part of the year. Actually analyzing a story felt so interesting, and it revealed themes and symbols that completely slipped under my radar the first time I read through the book. Holden's perspective of life made me think about my own, whether I was just as much a phony as a hypocrite telling the story. By the time the digital story and exam came around, I was ready, and on both I scored in the high 90s, which made me realize the rewards that might come along with my enjoyment of the class. After finishing up our work with The Catcher in the Rye, we entered into the new stuff of quarter 2, short stories and poetry. We started short stories first, and analyzed one without the help of Miss Mercado. With our newfound ability to dig up themes in literature, we had a zoo of a class to figure out what happened in the lottery before he came in to hear our ideas. Once again, I was greatly changed as a writer and a thinker, and I tried new devices and topics in my writing, like the surprise from the lottery and a moral based on Sammy's thoughts on risk-taking. Both of these essays were actually okay, and I was proud to have my name on the top of the paper. Then, of course, came poetry, which had hardly any part to play in the quarter other than foreshadowing my impending doom. I had very little experience with poetry, but I already hated it. Reading it was fine, just a little confusing, but writing poetry was the bane of my existence. Emotionally expressing myself in any way was a hard thing to do, and something as hated as poetry was no way to do it right. But despite my initial response of disgust and fear, I decided I would try to like it, because at least we were getting to the second semester. The third quarter, the Thursday of the school year. Nothing great about it, other than what came next was the end, the Friday that was quarter 4. I had convinced myself to look forward to poetry. Then I heard about the poetry slam. When Mr. Ricardo told us about what we would be presenting in a few weeks, along with the poems we would be writing in class, I immediately felt the terror I wouldn't experience again until I had to present. It couldn't get any worse for me. Deep emotional expression through a live performance to 30 of my classmates, my two biggest weaknesses in English put together into one massive assignment. There was no more embracing poetry. I resented this from the minute I heard it from Mr. Ricardo's mouth. In my hatred, I procrastinated until it was due in a week. Then I procrastinated even more. I had it ready the day it was due, but then each day I spent watching everyone else's, I realized how bad mine was. I spent every night for a week rewriting it, making it my own, something I actually cared about. When it came to the day I actually had to present, I felt a little pride. Pride in something that embodied what I hated. Once again in poetry, I got past something I hated for the improvement of my literary ability. The poem held up pretty well against everyone else's. It was about growing up as an individual, and although there was nothing too out there creatively, I used pretty good language and hardly stuttered compared to my presentation of Cole in the beginning of the year, during which I spent the entire speech looking straight down, trembling in fear. I looked at my progress happily. The confidence boost completely deflected the fear most people face in the mock college essay. Unlike the slam poem, I used this opportunity to tell my own stories of personal growth and about how my curiosity had led me to self-improvement as a student and a person. That same quarter, I tried to mimic the style in my extra essays, telling personal stories that shaped me into who I am, similar to my narrative. I tried playing with language a lot more, using metaphors and such in overabundance, something I had to fine-tune later on. To end the quarter, we had the oh-so-dreaded research paper. 10 pages of formal writing in perfect MLA. My partner in survival was Johnny, who was incredibly helpful up until he was sick the last week before it was due. At that point, we had pretty much done all the writing, just the conclusions, small corrections were left for me. The big problem was the stress that came along with the margins, header, font, citations, long quotes, and works cited being just perfect for MLA standards. I never told him, but I forgot to look over the works cited page after I printed it, and minutes before handing it in, I noticed how terribly ruined it had printed. The research paper didn't do too much for me. It was just a lesson on the strict rules of MLA, which had never been enforced on us before. They are useful to know, however. More than anything, it felt like something we needed to do to get out of the way, rather than improving ourselves as writers. The fourth quarter felt much more relaxed than all the others. We read Shakespeare on our own and discussed it in class, and had a few discussions on religion and other topics. But the most involved thing we did was our progression versus regression speeches. I said the word to regressing, and felt pretty confident in my speech. After that, we moved on to the Iliad and the Odyssey, and finally the looming mystery of the portfolio project was explained. The last couple of weeks were a mix of working on our projects and learning about Homer's epics, occasionally trying to squeeze in the 2 extra essays I needed that quarter. Between the speech and Mad 40 practice, as well as the Shakespeare extra credit, we only needed to write 2 essays, so I tried to make them as best as possible, a result of everything I learned this year. I used as much colorful language as possible, dropped in plenty of metaphors, and tried to make a lesson out of each of them. Reading over my final pieces made me think back to the trap I fell into, something I hadn't thought about since I was still angry about the workload. I realized how good it really was for me to have such a force pushing me to do better. My September freshman self wouldn't have chosen 30 essays just to become a better writer, because I could never imagine myself writing what I did this quarter. The trap set by our middle school teachers was a blessing. Had the 70 of us not fallen into it, very few of us would be where we are now.